There are places you cannot see, cannot touch, yet they consume you day by day. They do not exist on any map of the world, but on the map of your mind. Carl Jung once called them psychological environments, invisible spaces where the ego grows, hides, and eventually loses itself. In these places, you are not chained by metal, but by the habits of your own thoughts. You are not imprisoned by others, but by the voice in your head repeating, "Be better, be like them, be loved." Everything falls quiet. You once thought you were free, but in truth, you have been living inside an invisible building, 7 floors high, each one a dangerous place Jung warned could destroy the true self if you aren't awake. On the first floor, you see yourself through the eyes of others. On the second, you compare, compete, and grow tired. On the third, you wear the mask and forget your real face. On the fourth, you stay silent to keep the peace. On the fifth, you get lost in the storm of noise. On the sixth, you betray your soul for fear of being alone. And on the last floor, the basement of shadow, the parts you once rejected wait for you to return. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Each floor is another version of that fate. They do not destroy you in a day. They erode you in silence. They make you skilled at performing, but clumsy at being real. And even in success, you feel yourself drifting farther from who you are. Life becomes a maze where you walk endlessly without knowing where the exit is. But if you are brave enough to stop, to observe, to ask, "Which floor am I on?" the game changes, because awareness is the key. Jung said, "We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And that is the journey you are about to take. In this video, you will see the 7 dangerous places where your mind might be trapped. Understand how Jung mapped the way out, and learn how to return to your true self, not by becoming someone else, but by remembering who you are. You step into the first room without realizing it. Every wall is a mirror. They reflect your face, but also thousands of others: family, society, the people you admire, the ones you fear being compared to. Every gaze pulls you slightly toward them, soft yet persistent, until you forget the weight of your own eyes. Jung called this the collective possession effect. When you lose the boundary between your true self and the image the world wants you to become. In this room, you're no longer living, you're only reacting. You say what others say, believe what they believe, fear what they fear. Everything falls silent. You think you are choosing, but you are only repeating. Each nod is a way to survive the social environment, and with every nod, a piece of your real self falls away. Jung once said, "The more society tries to make you alike, the more courage it takes to be different." But difference requires awareness, and awareness often means loneliness. That's why most people stay in the room of reflections. They feel safe in the echo of the crowd, even as it slowly devours their inner voice. Some wake up inside that room, panicking when they realize every thought they have is an echo. They ask, "What is truly me?" And that is the first spark of awakening. To escape, you don't need to break the walls. You just need to stop looking into the mirrors. Let your gaze turn inward. At first, you will see nothing, only emptiness. But within that emptiness, the true self begins to whisper. Jung said, "Your mind is never lost. It's only covered by the voices of others." And when you realize that, the game shifts. You begin to hear your own voice again, small, trembling, but real. It is the first sound of your soul after years of reflection. Descending to the second floor, you hear the noise of the crowd, not outside, but in your mind. A familiar voice whispers, "Others have gone further. What about you?" This arena has no audience, only you, standing beneath imagined eyes. Jung said, "Comparison is the most insidious form of self-violence." And indeed, here, every gaze from another becomes an arrow, and you are the one holding the bow. You pull the string with expectation and shoot yourself with disappointment. Everything falls silent. You remember the last time you curled up in bed, scrolling through other people's lives, feeling like you were nothing. You compared love, money, success, even your pain, as if everything needed to be measured on the same scale. On this floor, you live on a strange energy, admiration mixed with envy, movement driven by fear of being left behind. That feeling keeps you running but takes you nowhere. Jung called it the ego's inflation-deflation cycle. When you feel superior, it swells. When you feel inferior, it collapses. Both pull you away from your true self. You think you're advancing, but you're just circling a track with no finish line. There are nights you can't sleep, not from exhaustion, but from feeling left behind. You hear invisible footsteps of others overtaking you, even when no one is there. That's your soul crying out, "Stop. I don't need to win. I just want to be me." And if you listen, you'll discover what Jung saw in hundreds of his patients, that the root of suffering isn't inferiority, but forgetting your inherent worth. Imagine life as a garden, and every person a different kind of flower. Comparison doesn't make you bloom faster. It just makes you stare at the next row while neglecting your own roots. You were not born to race. You were born to bloom in your own season. Jung said, "The one who knows who they are no longer needs to be better than anyone." And when you truly understand that, the arena falls silent. If this content is making sense to you, click subscribe and stay with this journey. Thank you for being here. It means more than you think. You leave not as the winner, but as the free one. You arrive at the third floor, where the lights shine brighter, yet the brightness blinds you. A sign hangs at the entrance, "Perform well." This is the theater of masks, where everyone knows they're acting, but no one dares to stop. Jung called this the state of identification with the persona. The moment you believe your role is who you truly are. Here, everyone wears the role society has assigned. The kind one, the strong one, the agreeable one, the one who's always fine. They speak pleasantly, smile at the right times, and nod to the rhythm of the crowd. The better they perform, the more they're praised. But when the curtain falls and the lights go out, only silence remains. So thick, no one dares to breathe. Everything falls quiet. Have you been there before, surrounded by familiar faces, yet feeling hollow inside? Smiling when you don't want to, nodding when your heart screams no? Jung said, "We wear masks for so long that we forget the face beneath them." This theater is dangerous not because it hurts immediately, but because it slowly teaches you to live untruthfully. Each time you choose safety over sincerity, you add another layer to the mask. Each time you stay silent to protect your image, you take another step away from yourself. Eventually, the performance becomes smooth, while your true voice fades to a whisper. Some realize it only when they're exhausted, when they no longer know what their sadness is about, what they want, or who they're even living for. Jung called this the persona crisis, the collapse of the image you built, exposing the darkness you've been hiding. It can arrive after heartbreak, failure, or on an ordinary morning when everything suddenly feels meaningless. But that is precisely when the first light of truth appears. You begin to see the gap between who you pretend to be and who you really are. It hurts, but it's real. Because only when you recognize the act can you choose to live honestly. Jung said, "The mask is not evil. It helps us survive. But when it sticks to the skin, we can no longer breathe." To escape this floor, you don't need to abandon every role. You just need to remember you're wearing them. Allow yourself to take the mask off when no one is watching. There, in the silence, you'll hear your real voice again. Rough, trembling, but alive. And if you stay until the end, you'll understand what most people never realize about this game. That no one ever forced you to wear the mask forever. You just forgot how to take it off. You open the door to the 4th floor, and instantly, every sound disappears. No laughter, no footsteps, only the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own heartbeat. But Jung once said, "Not all silence is peace." There is a kind of silence born not from serenity, but from fear. This room is exactly that. The place where people learn to swallow their voice to keep the peace. Here, everyone smiles while their heart aches. They say, "I'm fine," when their soul is torn apart. They believe silence is a sign of maturity, that holding an emotion is strength. But in truth, this is where the soul begins to die. Everything falls silent. You remember the last time you wanted to speak your truth but felt the words choke in your throat? When someone asked, "Are you okay?" and you said, "I'm fine," just to keep them comfortable? This room is filled with those answers. The endless, "I'm fine" is that have built walls thicker than any prison. Jung called this repression, the psychic mechanism that runs the silent command, "Stay quiet," until the system overloads. And when it breaks, people call it a crisis. Buddha crisis is only the soul's way of demanding to be heard again. Inside this room of silence, there's an even deeper fear, the fear of being misunderstood. You don't speak because you're afraid others will see you as weak, or worse, won't understand at all. But the longer you stay silent, the more foreign your emotions become, until you no longer know what you feel. Jung wrote, "The greatest tragedy is not that others don't understand us, but that we no longer understand ourselves." To escape this room, you must do the simplest and bravest thing. Admit what you feel. Say it not to be accepted, but to hear yourself again. You can write, cry, scream, or sit in stillness and listen to the trembling of your heart. That isn't weakness, it's courage. Because when you let emotion breathe, you open the door for your soul to return. Silence was never the goal. It was only the space where truth could finally rise. Jung said, "We cannot heal what we pretend does not exist." And when you finally understand that, the room of silence begins to echo with a faint, beautiful sound. The sound of you coming back. Leaving the room of silence, you think you've escaped, but the next floor is no calmer. The door opens, and a storm crashes in. Not of wind, but of noise. Sounds, images, information, emotions, opinions, all colliding into one violent wave. Jung once said, "When people can no longer bear their own silence, they will seek to make noise." This is the floor of the modern world, where people play music to avoid their thoughts, scroll endlessly to escape loneliness, and talk incessantly to avoid stillness. You find yourself surrounded by millions of voices, yet none of them sound true. Everything falls quiet. For a moment, you see the irony. On the previous floor, you were trapped in silence. Here, you're drowned in noise. Both are ways of running from the self. The storm of noise isn't just outside, it's in your head. A flood of thoughts, tangled memories, emotions you never processed. Jung called this psychic fragmentation, when consciousness is pulled in so many directions that it loses its center. You do more, say more, think more, yet touch nothing real. You're not tired because you lack time, but because you're giving energy to things that don't belong to you. Some people wear headphones all day, not to hear music, but to fill the space inside. Some say, "I'm fine," yet fear quiet, because in silence they can finally hear themselves. Jung wrote, "When the outer world becomes too loud, the soul will speak through fatigue." And maybe you've started hearing it, a dull ache behind your eyes, an emptiness after the screen goes dark, a long breath you can't explain. That's not illness, it's a signal. The soul is reclaiming its space. To escape this floor, you don't need to go anywhere. You just need to stop. Turn everything off for a moment and let the world spin without you for a few minutes. At first, it will feel strange, then scary, then still. In that stillness, you'll remember that peace was never out there. It's the only sound that remains when everything else is quiet. And when you find that sound again, the storm stops. Not because you defeated it, but because you stopped fighting it. The 6th floor has no mirrors and no noise, only a small table and an empty chair. On the table lies a worn sheet of paper with a faint line that reads, "I agree." This is the room where you've signed hundreds of invisible contracts, every time you said yes, while your soul screamed no. Jung called this soul loss, the moment a person abandons their true self in exchange for acceptance. On this floor, no one forces you anymore. You do it to yourself. You smile when you want to cry, agree when you want to walk away, and carry burdens that aren't yours just to avoid disappointing others. You've said, "It's fine," when you were breaking, nodded to jobs that drained you, smiled at those who crossed your boundaries because you were too afraid to draw new ones. Everything falls quiet. Jung said, "Each time you say yes to another, be sure you are not saying no to yourself." But you forgot. This room has no prisoners, only volunteers. People stay because they've confused kindness with self-erasure, endurance with virtue, sacrifice with love. Until one day, you feel nothing, no anger, no sadness, only emptiness. That's when your soul has already left. Jung once described patients who didn't suffer. They simply couldn't feel anymore. And that, he said, was the most dangerous state of all. Because emotional numbness is the price of betraying yourself for too long. You think you're living for others, but you're quietly dying in the silence of pleasing. Eventually, the body starts to speak. Chest tightness, sleepless nights, fatigue with no cause. These aches don't come from the heart or the stomach. They come from the soul. And if you're brave enough to stop, to look at your hands, you'll see how many times they've trembled, wanting to say no, but instead closed into a fist. Jung said, "There is no act more spiritual than speaking your truth. To escape this floor, you must learn to betray pretense instead of betraying yourself. Start with a small truth. I don't want to. It might disappoint someone, but that's how you know you're returning. People think awakening begins with enlightenment, but it actually begins with something much smaller, honesty. When you can speak truth, not to fight anyone but to stand with yourself, the room begins to fill with light. And you realize that what truly separates us from our essence is not the lies others tell us, but the quiet ones we tell ourselves. The final staircase leads down to a place with no light, only the damp smell of time. This is the basement of darkness. The place Jung said everything you've ever denied still lives. All the anger, envy, fear, desire, longing, guilt, they're all here, waiting for you to return. They haven't vanished. They've been waiting to be seen. When you arrive, they don't attack. They whisper, "Finally, you dared to look." Everything falls quiet. Jung wrote, "Darkness is not the enemy. It is the part of you that is not yet understood." On this floor, you don't fight, you observe. You see the face of the person you hate and realize it's also your own in another form. You see the fears that once haunted you and recognize they were only trying to protect you from pain. The darkness softens the moment it's touched. There is no miracle here, only radical honesty. When you can sit in the dark without running, light begins to appear, not from the ceiling, but from your heart. Jung said, "No one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And finally, you arrive at the place every floor has been leading to, yourself. The darkness is no longer the monster at the door. It becomes the guardian of freedom. When you step out, you don't carry blinding light, only a strange stillness, the quiet peace that comes when you are no longer afraid of who you are. When you've walked through all 7 floors, you realize the building was never a prison. It was a map of the mind, a place you had to lose yourself in to learn the way home. Jung said, "Wholeness is not achieved by running from the darkness, but by embracing it." And you, after everything, have embraced every part you once rejected: the perfectionist, the jealous one, the frightened child, the soul that once betrayed itself. Each floor you pass through hasn't vanished. It has simply grown quiet. The mirrored room now reflects your true face, no longer distorted by the gaze of others. The arena of comparison has become a small garden where you grow your own values. The theater of masks still stands, but now you perform only when you choose, and you know it's an act. The silent room is where you rest now, not where you hide. The storm of noise still howls outside, but you know how to listen within it. The room of self-betrayal has turned into a round table, a place where you and your soul sit together again. And the basement of darkness, once the most terrifying place, has become a warm chamber where you keep the parts of yourself you've learned to forgive. Everything falls quiet. Peace doesn't arrive with a bell. It arrives when you no longer need to prove anything. Jung said, "He who has looked upon his shadow no longer fears the night." You are not perfect, but you are whole. No one else can see the journey you've walked, but you can feel it in every breath, a stillness that carries weight. Now you understand that life doesn't have to be smooth. It only has to be true. Because every time you choose honesty over illusion, the game changes. You are no longer a character in someone else's script. You become the writer of your own. Jung believed that when one person awakens, the whole world shifts a little closer toward the light. And perhaps all it takes is one person brave enough to face their darkness, for thousands of others to remember they never had to fear theirs. As you step out of the building, the morning wind brushes softly against your skin. No more mirrors, no more masks, no more noise. Only you, bare, still, and real. Jung once said, "Rebirth does not come from changing the world, but from seeing it with eyes that have changed." And you, after everything, have changed the way you see. You no longer search for your true self somewhere far away, because now you know it never left. It's still here, in your first breath of the day, in the gentler way you look at yourself, in the quiet ease of no longer needing to prove anything to anyone. Everything falls silent. You realize that awakening doesn't separate you from the world. It lets you walk into it with a softer, steadier heart. Peace is not a reward for being good. It's the natural state of being real. Jung said, He who has understood his own darkness becomes gentle without being weak. Now you understand. You have descended, faced it all, and returned, carrying a light that isn't bright, but warm and steady. This journey doesn't end. It simply becomes a way of living. If you feel this, write in the comments, "I have returned to myself." Thank you for staying until the end of this journey, where all the layers dissolve and only one truth remains. You no longer need to search for your true self, because you are it.